room smelled like burnt coffee and laminate flooring. Noah Brenner knew that smell. She'd been in this specific room, or rooms identical enough to be the same room, 11 times in 10 years. Same flickering fluorescent. Same table bolted to the floor like someone expected it to run. Same manila folder sliding across the surface toward her hands like it had somewhere to be. She looked at it. Form 7 Delta, Revised Edition 2018, 12 pages. Her hands started shaking. This was the thing she hadn't wanted to tell anyone, that she got them to stop. For years of work, 2 therapists, one very expensive weighted blanket her mother had shipped from Haifa, and her hands had stopped their particular trembling pattern sometime in late 2018, around November, during a Thursday that smelled like rain and eucalyptus, and felt like maybe the world was going to leave her alone for a while. They'd started again the moment she walked through the door. Not because she was scared. She'd been scared before. She knew what scared felt like. It had a specific texture, somewhere between wet concrete and the 2 seconds before a phone rings, and you already know who it is and what they're going to say. This wasn't that. This was something more like recognition. She picked up the pen. The officer across from her, young, new, the kind of young that made her feel like she was looking at a photograph of someone she used to know, cleared his throat. "We just need you to document the Tiberias follow-up before your discharge is processed. Protocol." "I know what it is," Noah said. She did. She'd known what it was since she was 21 years old and someone had slid the first one across a table just like this one, in a room just like this one, and told her it was designed to protect her. She looked down at line 1. Describe the initiating incident in full sensory detail. Do not summarize. Do not interpret. Begin with what you saw. She put the pen down. Picked it up again. Put it down. The officer said nothing. She gave him credit for that. Outside, somewhere past the window that faced the northern training yard, she could hear the Caracal unit running drills. The cadence count. The boots hitting packed earth in a rhythm that had once been the rhythm of her own body, her own breath, her own certainty that she had been built exactly right for exactly this. She picked up the pen a 3rd time. And she went back to the beginning, not because the form asked her to, but because that is what Form 7 Delta always did, whether you wanted it to or not. It took you back. Every single time. Noah Brenner enlisted in June 2009 at 19 years old, which is to say, she enlisted the way most 19-year-olds do anything, with the full and unearned confidence of someone who has never yet been genuinely wrong about themselves. She was sharp, organized in a way that went past tidiness into something more like need, her bunk squared to the millimeter, her boots aligned like they were waiting to be inspected by God personally. Her knowledge of the security service, law memorized not because she had to, but because she had found it, read it, and felt something in her chest unclench in a way she couldn't explain to anyone who asked. The law said she had the right to serve in any role equal to any man. She had read that line 4 times. She had then gone back to her bunk, lay on top of the squared blanket without disturbing it, and stared at the ceiling for 20 minutes in a state that was not quite happiness and not quite relief, but lived in the same neighborhood as both. She wanted the Caracal Battalion, had wanted it since she was 16, and read a newspaper article about the mixed-gender combat unit on the Jordanian border and thought, with the clarity of someone who has just heard a word that describes exactly what they already are, that. She got it. Basic training was 5 weeks that felt like 5 months that felt like 5 minutes. Her body surprised her. Not that it was strong, she'd known it was strong, but that it was useful in a way her body had never been permitted to be before. All that energy that had always felt slightly too large for civilian life, suddenly given a container the exact right size. The other girls in her unit called her the Machine. Not meanly. The way a nickname can be not mean and still carry a blade, but with the specific admiration of people watching someone do the thing they were designed to do and doing it without apparent effort. She accepted it. She was the machine. She believed that completely. This is the part she would circle back to later, 11 times in 11 rooms, writing on 11 forms, the believing, how total it was, how it had never occurred to her that the machine had components she hadn't been told about, components that didn't show up in any training manual, components that would not reveal themselves until a specific kind of pressure hit them at a specific angle in a specific dark. But that was later. In June 2009, Noah Brenner was 19 and certain, and her boots were aligned, and her hands were completely, perfectly still. Form 7 Delta was introduced into IDF protocol in 2003 as part of a broader initiative following the integration of women into combat roles through the late 1990s. Its official name was the Mission Critical Emotional Response Documentation Form. The Army called it 7 Delta. The soldiers who had filled it out more than twice called it other things, most of which were not printable and several of which were not technically words. The premise was clean on paper. When a female combat soldier experienced what the form defined as a mission-critical emotional response, a freeze response, a dissociative episode, a moment of panic that affected operational capacity, she was required to document it in full within 48 hours. Not summarize it, not report it, document it. Sensory reconstruction, sequential detail, full written account of everything she saw, heard, felt, and did in the moments before, during, and after the incident. The purpose, according to the IDF Mental Health Division's 2003 guidance document, was threefold. 1. To prevent traumatic suppression. Soldiers who were not required to articulate their experiences were more likely to bury them, and buried experiences, the guidance noted, had a tendency to surface at operationally inconvenient times. 2. To create a documented record that protected the soldier from unfair operational assessment. If an incident was on record in the soldier's own words, it could not be mischaracterized or erased. 3. To allow the military psychologist assigned to the unit to track patterns over time and intervene before a soldier reached a breaking point. 3 reasons, all of them sensible, all of them on paper protective. The form itself was 2 pages in 2003. It became 4 pages in 2007, after a revision that added a section on pre-incident environmental factors. It became 8 pages in 2012, after a revision that added sections on unit relationship dynamics and personal history flags. It became 12 pages in 2018, after a revision that Noah had read twice and put down both times before she could finish it. Because by 2018, she had filled it out 10 times and had specific opinions about what the form was and what the form was not. And those opinions did not match the IDF Mental Health Division's 2003 guidance document in any meaningful way. What the guidance document did not mention, could not mention, because it was a guidance document and guidance documents do not deal in the specific weight of specific things, was what it felt like to reconstruct a moment of failure in writing, in full sensory detail, within 48 hours of having lived through it. What it felt like to write the words I froze on a government form with a regulation pen in a laminate room while the person across the table waited. What it felt like to hand that paper to someone else. What it felt like to do that 11 times. The guidance document was silent on all of this. Form 7 Delta was not designed to be cruel. This is the important thing. This is the thing Noah would say later, to the psychologist, to her mother, to herself in the specific register of someone who has decided to be precise about a thing that would be easier to be imprecise about. It was not designed to be cruel. It was just built without asking the people inside it what it felt like to be inside it. And that is a different kind of problem, a slower one. The kind that doesn't show up in a guidance document until it's been running for 16 years, and the women who have been carrying it have finally started putting the weight down somewhere visible. The night of November 14th, 2011 was cold in the way the northern border gets cold. Not the damp cold of the coast, not the dry cold of the desert, but a particular thin cold that found the gaps in your gear and stayed there, patient, like it had nowhere else to be. Noah was 21, 2 years in the Caracal, Night Patrol Eastern Sector 4-person team. She was second from the front. She would write this part 11 times, not because the form asked her to write it 11 times. It only asked for it once, the first time. But the problem with writing a thing in full sensory detail within 48 hours is that the writing doesn't end when the pen lifts. The brain keeps going. The brain is not interested in the 48-hour window. The brain runs its own protocol, with no guidance document and no revision schedule and no official purpose statement. What happened was this. They came around a ridge and there was a figure, just a figure, standing very still in a place where nobody should have been standing. The team lead called a halt, standard. They assessed. 2 seconds passed. Maybe 3. In those 2 seconds, maybe 3, Noah Brenner's body did something she had not trained it to do, and had not expected it to do, and could not explain in the debrief, or on the form, or in the 12 conversations she had about it afterward privately, in the specific privacy of her own skull at 3 a.m. It stopped. Not fear, not a decision, not a choice she made in any way that felt like choosing. Her body simply paused, like a program encountering a file type it hadn't been built to read. A half-second of pure system error, and then the team lead moved and her body came back online, and she moved with the team and it was fine. It was fine. The figure turned out to be a shepherd. Wrong sector, no threat, everyone went home. Nobody died. This was the thing she would repeat to herself for the next 8 years, in the specific tone of someone who knows they are arguing with their own nervous system and has accepted that the nervous system does not operate on logic. Nobody died. The form arrived the next morning. Standard Manila. Her name typed on the front, which she'd never gotten used to, the typed name, the official name, Brenner, Noah, SGT. Making it administrative in a way that made the thing inside her feel administrative too. She sat with it for 6 hours. She wrote exactly what happened. She wrote it the way the form asked, sensory, sequential, no interpretation. And the act of writing it with no interpretation was itself the most interpretive thing she had ever done, because every word she chose carried the weight of the words she wasn't allowed to choose, and she could feel them, the unchosen words, pressing against the inside of the sentences she wrote on the form. She handed it in at 2200. She did not sleep for 4 days. Not because she was ashamed. She had examined that question very carefully and the answer was no, or at least, not exactly, not in the way that word usually meant. It was something more like the freeze itself had been. Her brain encountering a file it didn't know how to process, circling it, running scans, finding no resolution, running scans again. She was fine during the days. Active, focused, the machine her unit had named her. At night her brain ran 7, Delta on a loop. The form was supposed to prevent suppression. What it had done, at least in the case of Noah Brenner, age 21, Northern Border, November 2011, was give the incident a document, a permanence, a paper existence that the brain could reference instead of releasing. She didn't know how to say this on a form. There wasn't a field for it. Promoted to staff sergeant. Commendation for navigation performance. Winter exercise, Golan sector. 1 Form 7 Delta, April. A moment of dissociation during a live fire exercise that lasted under a second and affected nothing operationally, and was documented in full sensory detail within 48 hours as required. She slept badly for 2 weeks, transferred to Mixed Infantry Training Battalion as a course instructor. First woman in her unit to hold the position. The younger soldiers looked at her the way she had looked at the Caracal article at 16, with that particular hunger that wants to become what it's looking at. She taught them how to read terrain. She taught them how to move at night. She taught them, without meaning to, that female soldiers carried their composure differently than male soldiers. Not worse, not better, just differently, with a specific awareness of being watched that became its own kind of training. 1 Form 7 Delta, September. She wrote it in 3 hours this time. She was getting faster. She didn't know if faster was better. No form. A full year with no form. She marked the date, December 31st, 2014, sitting in her bunk in the way she used to sit on the squared blanket at 19, and felt something that wasn't quite happiness and wasn't quite relief, but lived in the same neighborhood as both. She let herself believe the machine had been recalibrated. 2 forms, March and August. March was a crowd control incident in a civilian zone, a stone thrown, a child's face. Something that locked her feet for 1 second before her training unlocked them. August was harder to name, and she didn't try to name it on the form because the form said do not interpret, and she had, by 2015, developed a compliance with that instruction that was almost religious. 2 forms. She slept badly through October. Promoted again, lieutenant. She was 26. At the ceremony, her commanding officer, a man with a handshake like a structural beam, told her she was exactly the kind of soldier the IDF had built the Equality Amendment for. She smiled in a way that used all the right muscles. She thought about the forms. She didn't say anything about the forms. 1 Form December. Operational, documented within 48 hours, filed. The ladder stopped here. Not because she stopped climbing, because something happened that was too large for a ladder, a thing that doesn't have rungs, that has only weight, and she had to put it down somewhere before she could figure out what to do next. This is where Tiberias goes. Phase 6, Mission Tiberias, 2017. She would not write about Tiberias in full until the 11th form. This is the only way to understand why the 10th form, filed in February 2018, 12 pages, revised edition, sat on her desk for 3 weeks with nothing on it. 3 weeks. She had never missed the 48-hour window before. She had filled out forms in the field. She had filled out forms running a fever. She had filled out 1 form sitting in a vehicle, by flashlight, with her left hand because her right had a minor shrapnel graze that she had not reported because the paperwork for the shrapnel graze would have delayed the 7 Delta, and she had, by that point, decided that the 7 Delta was the more important piece of paper to file on time. The machine had a hierarchy. She had internalized the hierarchy. But Tiberias broke the hierarchy. What happened in Tiberias was a civilian casualty situation during an operation in January 2017. A man, not a combatant, in a place he should not have been, at a time when the operational parameters had not accounted for him. Noah was not the decision maker. The decision had gone up the chain above her and come back down and been implemented before her body registered what was happening. She did not freeze. This was the part she could not fit into any form-shaped container. She did not freeze. She performed exactly as trained. Every motion, every call, every operational beat, correct, complete, documented in the mission debrief with 0 adverse notes against her name. She was not cited. She was not investigated. She was officially, formally, and completely cleared. The form arrived anyway. 12 pages. She sat with the first line, described the initiating incident in full sensory detail. Do not summarize. Do not interpret. Begin with what you saw and understood for the first time what the form was actually asking her. It was asking her to go back there. Not metaphorically, not therapeutically, literally to reconstruct in government-approved language on an official document that would be filed in her permanent record the exact texture of the worst 60 seconds of her life. The smell, the sound, the specific quality of the light, All of it, for the record, within 48 hours. She thought about the guidance document, the three purposes: protection from suppression, protection from mischaracterization, pattern tracking for early intervention. She thought about the man. She put the pen down. The 3 weeks that followed were quiet in the specific way that things are quiet when a great deal is happening beneath the surface. She reported for duty. She led her unit. She ate, slept, filed routine reports, responded to emails. From the outside, she was indistinguishable from every previous version of herself. Inside, she was running a negotiation with a blank page. On day 22, she was called to her commanding officer's office and told gently that the form needed to be submitted. Protocol. She nodded. She asked for 48 more hours. She went back to her bunk. She wrote 6 words. Then she stopped and went to see the psychologist. Phase 7, institutional response. The psychologist assigned to her unit was a man named Dr. Yaron Katz, who had been practicing military psychology for 14 years and had, by his own admission during their second session, read more forms 7 deltas than he could count and found most of them deeply inadequate as clinical tools, while simultaneously recognizing their administrative necessity. He had kind eyes and a habit of writing things down with a very small pen that looked wrong in his large hands, and Noah found these 2 details, the eyes, the pen, disproportionately comforting in a way she didn't examine too closely. She told him she couldn't write the form. He asked why. She said, "Because the form asks me to reconstruct the incident in full sensory detail, and I have spent the last 22 days trying to explain to myself why doing that is not the same as living through it again, and I cannot make the argument work." He wrote something down. He said, the form was designed to prevent suppression. She said, "I know. I've read the guidance document." He said, "You've read the guidance document." 3 times, she said. The 2003 version and both revisions. He put his small pen down on the notepad and looked at her with the expression of someone recalibrating. "Tell me what you think the form is doing," he said. She thought about it for a long time. Long enough that the fluorescent light above them cycled through its flicker pattern twice. "The form," she said finally, "is a machine designed to process a human experience into a document. The problem is that processing requires reconstruction, and reconstruction is re-exposure and re-exposure, without a clinical framework, without a therapist present, without any structure beyond do not summarize. Do not interpret is just trauma, dressed up in government formatting with a 48-hour deadline." She paused. "I have done it 10 times, she said. "I know how to do it. The knowing how to do it is not the same as it being okay to do it. I think we have been confusing those 2 things for 16 years." Dr. Katz picked up his small pen. He wrote for a long time. Then he said, "I'm going to recommend a formal review of the 7 Delta Protocol." She looked at him. "I've recommended it before," he said, and his voice carried something she recognized. A tone that lived in the same family as nobody died. That particular flatness of someone who has repeated a true thing into a system that does not change and has made a kind of peace with the repetition. "Will it change anything?" she asked. "Probably not immediately," he said. "How many other soldiers have said what I just said to you?" He looked at the stack of folders on the corner of his desk. He didn't answer. She understood that the answer was in the stack, and the stack was tall, and that this was its own kind of documentation. She went back to her unit. She completed Form 7 Delta for the 10th time, submitted it within the window, slept badly for 3 weeks, led her unit with 0 adverse notes against her name. The protocol was not revised. Phase 8, the reckoning and the ending. The morning of March 4th, 2019, Noah Brenner's service term ended at 800. She knew this, had known it for months, had circled the date in the specific way she had once aligned her boots, precisely, deliberately, with the full weight of intention behind the gesture. She was in the laminate room at 700. Form 7 Delta, Revised Edition 2018, 12 pages. The final incident, a border patrol, February 2019. A freeze response lasting approximately 1 second. No operational impact. Nobody died documented as required. This was the 11th form. She had told herself she would feel something different on the 11th. Not better. She had stopped expecting better from forms, but different. Completed. Like the last page of a book you've been carrying for a long time. She didn't feel different. She felt, sitting in that room with the burnt coffee smell and the bolted table and the young officer across from her who had the grace to stay silent, exactly like herself. Exactly like the person who had sat in the first room at 21 and written "I froze" on a government form and not slept for 4 days. The machine, it turned out, was not separate from the person inside it. It never had been. She wrote through the 12 pages without stopping. She knew the form by heart now, not just its structure but its specific gravity, the way certain questions pulled at different parts of her memory, the way the do not interpret instruction functioned as an instruction to interpret everything more intensely in the adjacent space of her own mind. She wrote it anyway, not because it was right, not because it had ever fully worked in the way the guidance document promised it would work, but because she had learned, somewhere between the first form and the 11th, the difference between a thing that is broken and a thing that is all there is. The form was broken. It was also all there was. She got to the last page, the final section, line 47 under the heading Outcome. In your own words, describe the resolution of the incident. What has changed as a result of this experience? She had read this question 11 times. The first 10 times she had written operational language, unit cohesion maintained, personal response time within acceptable parameters, no further incidents of note. She sat with it for a long time this time. The young officer across from her was very still. Outside, the Caracal unit was running drills, cadence count, boots on packed earth. She could hear, underneath the rhythm, the specific sound of young women learning to become the machine, that particular combination of effort and certainty, and the completely unearned confidence of someone who has never yet been genuinely wrong about themselves. She picked up the pen. Under Outcome, in the space provided, she wrote one word. Survived. She handed the form across the table, stood up, and picked up her bag, the same bag she'd carried since 2009, olive drab, one broken clasp she'd never replaced because there was always something more urgent, and walked to the door. The young officer called after her, Sergeant Brenner, is there anything else you need to? No, she said. She walked out, past the training yard where the Caracal unit moved in their rhythm, past the mess hall where the coffee was always burnt, past the administrative block where 11 manila folders sat in a filing cabinet with her name on the tab, stacked in chronological order, a decade of her life organized into government-approved sensory reconstruction. She walked through the gate. The gate guard, young, new, the kind of young that was starting to make her feel very specifically her own age, gave her the standard departure nod. She nodded back, and then she was outside. The air was different outside. Not better, not cleaner, just different. The way air always feels different when a container has been removed from around you. She stood still for a moment, not frozen. She knew the difference now between frozen and still, had learned it across 10 years and 11 forms and one psychologist with a small pen, and let her lungs do what lungs do. In and out. She had survived the border. She had survived the missions and the cold and the stone throne and the man in Tiberias, and all the seconds she had stopped when she wasn't supposed to stop. She had survived the form. 11 times. She started walking toward the bus stop. Her hands were shaking. She didn't try to stop them.